Good afternoon, everyone. This is Nina Stack, President of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, and welcome to our first call of 2003 for funders to learn and share ideas as we all continue to work to help rebuild and recover from Hurricane Sandy. I want to thank you all for everyone who's been reaching out and sharing information with us. We will continue to do what we've been doing and putting messages and information out on the listserv and connecting folks where we can. I'm very pleased today that we have with us Stewart Sarkozy-Banoczy. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, and Stewart, you'll correct me when the time comes, who is the Director of the Office of International and Philanthropic Innovation at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, as most of us know. We had sent out Stewart's bio with the reminder email today, and I encourage you to take a look at that. Stewart, you've got a really fascinating background. As Stewart will tell us, HUD is playing a very important role in the rebuilding efforts, as Secretary Donovan, the Secretary of HUD, has been named the chair of President Obama's Recovery and Rebuilding Task Force. And Stewart will be talking more about what they have been doing, and also knowing that not everything's finalized yet. So I want to make sure people's expectations are in check for that. Before we hear from Stewart, though, I wanted to update everyone on a few things. First, I wanted to let you know that I have been in touch with the Governor's Recovery Office staff, specifically the Operations Director, Amy Katafi, who is working for Mark Frazan, who is the Director of the Governor's Office. And I look forward to, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be meeting with Mark and his team very soon, and then we will look forward, hopefully, to having him on one of our calls coming up, probably sometime in February. I also want to let you know that we are putting together a bus tour site visit specifically for funders through Ocean and Monmouth County. It will be a one-day tour. We anticipate stopping at least 3 different sites, but hearing from what we're shooting for 10 to 12 different organizations and groups that are all involved with the recovery efforts. That site visit we're scheduling it for February 26th with a snow date of March the 7th. You'll have more information about that as we get the details confirmed, but you could mark your calendars now if you like, and as I said, we'll send out more information. I am very pleased and grateful to Ocean First Foundation, Kathy Durante, once again, playing an incredible role, helping us. Ocean First will be covering the cost of refreshments for this, and we'll be looking hopefully for some support to cover the cost of the bus, if there are others. But and Kathy will also be helping us connect with some of the best people for funders to be talking to in Ocean and Monmouth County. Next week we will have our call again, and we are hoping to have some representatives, leaders from the long-term recovery teams, long-term recovery groups that have gotten underway, and they are active in Ocean and Monmouth and Middlesex and Bergen County, and we're hoping to connect with Hudson County. So that we'll send out more information about that later in the week, but that'll be our call next week. And then we will take a break again on the 21st of January, but start up again on the 28th. I'm going to do one thing before we talk with Stewart, and ask Denise Gilliam, I think, is with us. And Denise, if you press *7, it will unmute your phone. Denise should be with us, and she had some information that she wanted to help clarify, because they're getting things that would be helpful for you to make sure that your grantees know about. Some confusion, I believe. Denise, are you with us?
Yeah, Nina, I'm right here. I just wanted to be sure that the foundations were aware that some of the grantees and some of the grant information I've been seeing was particular to, the one I remember best was to fire departments. And I just want to get the word out and make sure that everyone understands that usually fire departments that have damage would be eligible for public assistance funding from FEMA, and I want to make sure that the funds that can be given to the grantees from FEMA would be utilized first, and if the foundations are interested in doing things like providing the cost share for that, that would be great. But to not jump in and try to fund everything before they actually find out if they're going to be eligible for public assistance funding.
And I think one of the things that folks can do, because Denise is on the listserv, if you have any questions about a specific kind of organization, like a fire company or something along those lines, that you are welcome to put the query out on the listserv or contact Denise directly. And she may not be the one to answer it, but she can get it to the person who can. Does that sound right?
Perfect. That's great.
Good. Okay. So what I'd like to do is, Stewart, I'm hoping that you're with us. If you would press *7, it will unmute your line.
I'm here.
Yay, thank you. And I butchered the second half of your name, so could you say, because it's beautiful.
I don't know about that. It's a lot of consonants. Sarkozy-Banoczy is the way it's pronounced.
That's it. Great, thank you. And I'm really, really pleased that you could join us today, and you've been enormously helpful. I will tell folks Stewart has been enormously helpful to the Council in helping us make sure that New Jersey is at the table when folks nationally are talking about how they might respond. And we really appreciate that, and we're anxious to hear what news you can share with us now.
Sure, and I hope that it will be interesting. And I thank you, Nina, for having me on, and also just a big thanks in general for the work that you're doing, and the listserv and the emails that we're getting. I'll have to say that it's hard for me not to forward the newsworthy pieces every day when I get them, or whenever it is I receive them, because they're just incredibly interesting and helpful. And in fact, Nina, you said two things that are in some ways really important for my remarks, and that is you talked about learning and sharing, which is a lot of what we've been doing and a lot of what we're going to have to be doing going forward, as well as sort of coupling together when it comes to aligning funds and aligning plans and activities. But the other thing that you said is that not everything is finalized, and for most of you that couldn't be more true when you watch the news about the supplemental funding for recovery. So I will only touch upon that slightly and probably repeat only things you know, but just to sort of I will touch on that a little bit. So Nina and Elizabeth asked me to touch on four things specifically, as you saw in the emails, the role of IPI and what we've been doing related to Sandy recovery, because they are directly connected to our kind of day-to-day operations in this office, just in a heightened sense now for this work. And the second thing would be the task force, the Rebuilding Recovery Task Force. I'll give an update on that. There may actually be some new nuggets there. And then other things that connect to this in terms of IPI activities and other kinds of recovery work, which may really beg a number of the questions that could come, and I'm glad to take them. I'm glad to take them at the end. I'm glad to take them and be interrupted, or kind of after each section, whatever seems to work the best.
Why don't we after each section,
okay.
If that's okay, and then we'll encourage people, they can unmute their phone and ask their question.
That's great. Let's do it that way. And I'm fine with them being sort of slightly out of order sometimes, but it's great that they're broken down in these four pieces. And then the fourth area is to talk a little bit about the philanthropic lessons learned, private sector and philanthropic lessons learned session that we did on December 10th. I believe that was also included in one of the listservs or emails sent to you for this call today. So I know that you have that in hand, but I'll just cover a few of the kind of primary takeaways from that, because while it was limited, it was very, very interesting, and I think exhibits good pieces of information, but also the steps going forward that I think people wish to not reproduce, that were learned in other situations, but also the things that are very good suggestions. And some of you who are on the phone have already made those suggestions directly to us and others. So I just look forward to a really great conversation, and hopefully there are some new things in here for all of you. So the first area is the role of IPI. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Office for International and Philanthropic Innovation began in its present form 3 years ago, right about now. I came on board, and we had our Deputy Assistant Secretary, who was a Deputy Chief of Staff in the Secretary's office. They went through this process that I came in on the tail end of, and then came to work in the office. And I'm now the director of the office, and unfortunately that means a little bit more on the managerial and administrative side, but still working on some of the projects that some of you on the phone may be familiar with. But basically the office was designed to really look at how we talk to the private sector, how we engage with philanthropy. Everybody in the office pretty much has come from the private sector, from NGOs, from CDFIs, from philanthropic background. I myself was very active in the CDFI world, still sit on a couple of small CDFI boards of directors, sit on a foundation board of directors, a community foundation here in Maryland, or in Maryland where I live. And so the folks who came to the office over time, and those that were here beforehand working on the international work, really were looking at trying to be very proactive in finding new lessons and best practices. And we have three primary goals. The first is research and analysis, and so we do sort of quick turnaround types of research. We've worked on prize competitions and those kinds of things as well. That analysis then helps with policy, and you can imagine from both the philanthropic and the international and the corporate private sector, the kinds of things that we might have coming into us that could change policy, but also the kinds of partnerships that could be created, and that sort of leads to the other two goals of the office. And the second one is resource alignment. It's pretty clear, especially with something like the disaster recovery, but even on a day-to-day basis, the money that flows from the federal government, which of course I do not personally have control over, but HUD's money and other agencies and philanthropic dollars, small NGO dollars, investments of varying sizes from various places, all kind of coming into a single place, should be better coordinated. That means silo busting on the federal side between the agencies, inside the agencies, between the various programs, and to the external, because our real kind of quote-unquote clients are the program offices here in the building, the other agencies, as well as philanthropy, government, and non-governmental organizations. So the design is to sort of bring all that together for better resource alignment, which is coupled then with our third goal, which is innovation transfer. And that's really being able to provide evidence and lessons from those first two buckets into policy development and dissemination. And that may just mean teaching folks how to do this kind of philanthropic engagement at a local level. It may mean transferring the actual platforms, meaning technological platforms and other things, to really make a difference in the kinds of innovation that we see from rural areas to small towns and to larger cities, and shift the way that government is doing business. So it's a bit of a private sector, private side philanthropic viewpoint of the world that is here in this office. And then you couple that with all the international exposure that we have, the foreign government relations that we have. We have very deep relations with the Dutch, which of course have come in very, very handy when it comes to the recovery work and their existing relations and doing more with that. But it also comes with sustainability work we've been doing with Germany and other types of activities that we do to learn from places like Brazil, who we also have a deep relationship with. So those three goals lead us to work very closely, and with the outside sectors, and with the storm hitting where it did, and the states that it did, and the cities and the locations that it did, it brought to the fore the ability for the back and forth between our agency and all of the other outside partners really, really clearly. Right after the storm, we immediately started getting calls, or we started making calls, and since the storm have been creating a database of the various funds that have been created and keeping track of them, individual briefing notes on various funding investments and types of activities that are going on, sometimes by affinity group like the Council or Philanthropy New York, sometimes by individual foundations like the Long Island Community Foundation or the Brooklyn Foundation or what have you, and then others that are placed throughout New Jersey and in Manhattan proper. So as Nina said, for us, and this is where it gets difficult, not everything is finalized, not everything goes at the same speed, and there are so many different types of communities and so many different types of ways of doing this work, from New Jersey to Connecticut to on Manhattan to Staten Island to parts of Long Island. So we are trying to, if you will, hold kind of all the balloons threads together in the hurricane and make sure they're all kind of connected to each other. And the ability to do that comes from these kinds of presentations, and comes from our also just our reaching out and making sure that we have a handle on where things are, and making sure people are invited or introduced to each other. I mean, sometimes it's very simple things, just, make sure Nina gets to go to this meeting because they didn't think to invite people from New Jersey. Not that anyone would ever do that, but making sure that all of those connections are made. And so for us, the role that we play on a day-to-day basis just kind of got more focused on the recovery work. And so since then, we've been preparing these briefing memos for the Secretary and for the task force as it has ramped up, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the role, in a sense, is being proven out. And the task force then kind of takes the role a little bit further and a little bit deeper. But what it also does, and I will also mention this in a minute under the on the other activities, but it then helps us connect other things we're doing to the fact that the recovery is going on, so we don't miss opportunities to leverage more funds or to be smarter about how we're doing some of the rebuilding. So I will sort of stop there with the IPI 101 and see if anybody has any questions.
If you have a question, you can hit *7 to unmute and then *6 to mute again. Okay.
Okay.
Assume we don't have any. Keep
All
going.
right. Okay. So the next piece is the task force, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this in case some of the materials and those kinds of things are pretty dense or come out in a flurry from various locations within the government. But as most of you know, President Obama charged Secretary Donovan with chairing the federal task force to support the state and local governments and kind of work through this process over the next time period. And on December 7th, there was an executive order issued establishing the task force and creating Secretary Donovan as the chair of that. And because some things have been delayed, including the congressional actions, it's been a little bit slower in the process. So to some extent, what we've been doing in IPI, we just kind of kept forging onward, watching some of that happen. But now the task force is sort of really getting ramped up, and I'm pleased to say that kind of an official transition took place this morning where we're moving towards staff being put in place from various agencies and all the agreements being worked on. One important update is that an executive director has been named, and that is Laurel Blatchford, who was the Secretary's chief of staff until December, and so she will be picking up the reins of the actual running of the task force, and will be running, as you can imagine, 1,000 miles an hour, and already was before this. But before I talk anything more about the staffing and kind of the next steps, I want to touch upon a little bit of the specific mandates that the task force has, and there's 4 primary mandates. The first is to coordinate closely with FEMA and all the stakeholders in the affected region, and that's to develop and deliver an executable rebuilding strategy. And you know that already those kinds of things have been happening in terms of the surveys and the kind of updates and checklists that have been going on, and that stuff is will be feeding into the task force more and more as this starts to transition, much more so from response to recovery and rebuilding. The second thing is to coordinate the flow of federal recovery funds and where it's appropriate, coordinate the reduction of regulatory burden. As anyone who's been on the ground, I've experienced this myself. You know, all kinds of different funds flow in, different types of regulatory burdens on them. It's difficult to layer those funds together, even harder to kind of leverage private funds and philanthropy and others. So idea is that we find ways to make that easier to do. The third thing is to monitor progress and bolster accountability for federal funds. As you can imagine, with some of some of you had experience with the ARA dollars and others, there will be some pretty tight tracking of whatever funds they are from whatever agency as to what they're used for and how they leverage other funds and so forth. So that will be another thing that the task force gets involved with. And the fourth thing is where, in some ways, all of these, but all of these mandates are places where you could see where philanthropic engagement, knowledge, alignment of funds, and others would have a bearing. But this fourth item is to work to remove obstacles to best support and enable long-term resilient rebuilding and address future risks and vulnerabilities. And this is one of those areas where, especially with my background and many of the people who work at HUD, the idea of rebuilding better that everyone has been talking about, doing things from retrofitting in a better way, immediately from damaged homes and destroyed homes and businesses. It seems like a very logical thing, but it isn't always something that is innate in this. The ability to do that and to work closely together on that is what the task force is going to work on as well. Now, this isn't a permanent entity or institution. It's going to operate for 180 days when it officially kicks off, and that official kickoff is kind of delayed every time the funding gets delayed, but basically people are kind of already working on things, and there was no way to not work on things looking forward. But 180 days, that means that after that time period, there will be a long-term rebuilding strategy that includes a summary of all the work that the task force has done, prioritization of major recovery needs. Some of those are being becoming clear already. A summary of specific federal, state, and local government and private sector actions that could support the region's recovery. This is where I see us often talking with all of you on the philanthropic side, corporations, chambers, and so forth, impact investors, and kind of figuring out where that there is for the long term, and also a plan for measurement of outcomes and milestones. And so that the evaluative piece is definitely in there, and so therefore a set of milestones and the progress towards the attainment of those goals that get set up will also be part of it. I don't know how many of you were able to join on that lessons learned that we had, but you did hear from Laurel, who at that point had not been appointed to the executive director position of the task force, but you did hear her give more detail on the background and the role that the task force is playing. You also heard at that point from our acting assistant secretary, Erica Potheg, who described more specifically IPI's role, which I talked about a little bit already, and that kind of input from you and the kinds of things I talked about that we do on a day-to-day basis is really important. So we will hear from various foundations, not just about what they plan to fund and how they're going to fund it and who they're partnering with, but also feedback that they're getting from grantees and NGOs in the area, because then I will just pass that on to the task force or other folks at HUD who are working specifically in areas, including our HUD regional office, who since the storm hit in the region there. So the task force is slowly being built up. As I said, the staff is coming on. I am officially going to be joining the task force on detail and the secondment on a partial plan for the next 6 months. And again, to continue the alignment of funding, to continue the partnership brokering and the information brokering, and try to continue to do what we've been doing even better, and also set it up for the long term so that it's at the regional level. It's not sort of top down or heavy handed or Bigfoot from our side. So I think I'll stop there on the task force and see if there's any questions at this point.
Great, thank you. So *7 to unmute your phone.
Hi, this is Marco Navarro from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Yeah.
Stewart, thanks so much for your time.
Hey, Mark. Yeah.
It's great to have some of your background being part of this whole process. I'm curious, is it too early to get a sense of the long-term plan? Is that 5 years, 6 years, just kind of a general sense of how you're thinking about this going forward?
So from the task force side, it's too soon, but I would say that what we have heard and what we've seen from a lot of the plans that have been developed, and also those plans that are being considered in terms of the bigger funds that have been created, we know that some of those are 3 to 5 to 7 years to really do what's necessary to rebuild areas. I think the bigger question, and that's the unknown right now, is what amount of money comes from Congress? What amount of private sector, philanthropic sector gets added to that? And therefore, based on that amount and that budget, or any other kinds of long-range types of activities that we do, are we rebuilding houses in the same places? And if so, what does that mean for the kinds of protections that they'll need to harden the environment? Versus moving them, and therefore a whole other additional set of costs for where folks would be moved, or if they're, or rebuilding big dune areas, or you got to get the boardwalks back, you got to get businesses back, and so I think it's getting closer, and you can imagine from some of the funds that have been created and some of the plans that are already out there that some of this is going to be in that time frame that you mentioned, and then there's some of this unknown because those dollars have not been coupled together, and the amounts and the final lists have not been created. So I see that in the next months to 3 months, there's going to be a much more intentional sort of here's what's short long-term, mid-long-term, and the long-term. Certainly lessons we've learned from other countries and things that, in fact, we just saw in the Netherlands over the last couple of weeks. Those kinds of infrastructure projects are the long-term. So I think it's a lot of unknown until we know how much money is coming. But from what's already being created by philanthropy in the private sector, we know that there's some 2 and 3 year projects, and then there's some things that are longer, and then there's the immediate how do we restore boilers in this place? How do we rebuild this particular front a Main Street section of a city or a town? So I think it's along the scale.
Thanks.
Yep.
Other questions? Press *7 to unmute. It's hard to believe, Stewart, but they're actually a shy bunch.
Well, this happens on our funder calls. I should have mentioned that this is not foreign. We do usually once a month a funder call on a particular program or a new grant notice that's going out or something, and we'll have 50 people on, and no questions will be asked. So I don't take it personally. That's for sure.
Good.
Hi, this is Bob. This is Bob Ottenhoff from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hi, Stewart. Hi, Nina.
Hi.
Stewart, I wanted to find out more if you mentioned that one of the 4 goals of the task force is going to be to coordinate federal funds and coordinate among government agencies. Will these agencies be putting money into planning and kind of civic engagement to help on long-range planning, land use discussions, et cetera?
It's a great conversation. I think that a little bit similar to Mark's question, it will depend on what program funds from what agency. I think the answer is yes. How much and how long and to what extent will be dependent on how much the funds are there. The idea of coordinating them, and especially coordinating them and leveraging them with philanthropic and private dollars, would be that instead of doing a bunch of individual plans, that there's a coordination around that for whatever particular area it is. So if, for instance, you were to take CDBG funds, and in a particular area those CDBG funds were to be used for some immediate physical infrastructure issues, and then there was some planning in it, my guess is that planning money would then have to be coupled with other agency funds and other outside funds to be sure that it's effective, and then roll it into the actual doing of the plan once that kind of work is done. So that's one of the things that's not clear until everybody gets their assigned funds is how much will come from DOT versus HUD, and therefore what programs will it flow out of. We know it's going to be CDBG primarily or individually. So how does that flow into whatever amount that is that goes to DOT versus Department of Interior versus USDA? And so I think in each location, it'll get those pieces will get worked out as the actual amount is known.
And if I can jump in, Stewart, this is Emily Meyer. I'm with the Community Planning and Capacity Building function at the New Jersey Joint Field Office.
Yep.
And just to kind of build on what you're saying, certainly there are many different types of federal funding for land use planning. And there's also several different kinds of direct technical assistance. And the Community Planning and Capacity Building function actually exists to assist communities, local governments, in identifying the land use policies that they would like to adjust, following the community's vision of that. So that's going on at both at the New York and New Jersey Joint Field Office currently, and potentially at the Connecticut Joint Field Office as they kind of develop their program and assess their need.
Thank you.
Thanks. And one of the things that we've heard from some of the community foundations, for instance, is that kind of town by town, the kinds of things they've asked for help for, similar to what was just described, then that turns into the discussion of the longer-term planning, which in turn sort of triggers those series of questions about where the funds will come from. It's part of our particular or my particular role to then say, how much of this is left unfunded, or how much of this is longer-term planning that requires some kind of structured pool or recovery fund, and start to be a little more creative about that. So I think as some of those plans are adjusted for the reality of funds that are flowing, there will also be a secondary set of those kinds of discussions about physical as well as other types of infrastructure buildup.
Great. Other questions?
Thanks, Bob.
Press *7 to unmute.
Hi, Stewart. It's Elizabeth. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Elizabeth Murphy.
Good. Hi, everyone. So I just had two questions. One is, I know that the task force is not staffed yet, and that can't happen until the appropriation is voted on and decided upon. But I just wonder, are there any New Jersey representatives that might be involved in these early conversations with all of you? I'm just curious if you can share that with us. And the second question, I'll let you answer that, and then I have another one. Go ahead.
Okay. So there has been a lot of, so we've had somebody from the Secretary's office spending any time that he's there, but also separately, and I know is going to be there again in 2 weeks, meeting with a smaller group of the Funders Network is having a gathering, and I think I'm going to spend the day with them sort of getting the direct input from New Jersey representatives kind of at the local level and at the state level and kind of everywhere in between. That have been feeding into the what has become the task force, so to speak. It's hard to talk about it like it's an existing staffed entity, because at this point, every agency, but particularly HUD, has had people on the ground from headquarters and from the regional office, who has a field office there in New Jersey, taking in this information, taking in FEMA's information as it does its surveys, and starting to sort of crunch all of that together. The one thing that I hope we'll be able to do better, for instance, is that I got a request from a particular location for more detailed information on damage and destroyed homes and other kinds of information that could be graphically represented in charts and on maps. Being able to get those requests and get them back out is something that we're trying to be as fluid about as possible. So there has been that kind of input from the New Jersey side into the buildup of this, and there will be more. There will be subsections. I think if you look at the PowerPoint that we sent out to you after the session that Laurel went over, you'll see there's almost sort of two deputized areas underneath the executive director, one for New Jersey and one for New York.
Something you just said, you said you'd been in touch, or that you're here, and that the Funders Network would be locally, and I'm wondering what Funders Network?
Do you know the Funders Network for Smart Growth?
For Smart Growth, okay,
yep.
That's what I did. I wasn't sure.
TFN, sorry, yes.
Okay,
yes.
And you said that they're planning something locally here in New Jersey?
It's called the Older Industrial Cities Work Group.
Right.
Is creating just a kind of a day-long or a day-and-a-half event, and I can certainly talk to Ben and have that information forwarded to you.
Oh, sure, that's fine, and I can get it from Ann. That's that's helpful to know that.
Yes, so it's Ann and Chris Smith, because
okay.
It's kind of Chris Smith has always been doing the older industrial cities, and Ann is the one who is helping Chris set that up. And again, primarily, it started, I think, more as a Jersey city, and has expanded slightly. And I just found out about it today, as a matter of fact. And so again, this sort of shows how hard it is for everyone to keep track of what everyone is doing. And at this point, I'm trying to keep track of everybody. So any of these types of things that show up on your listserv or that you guys want to send to me, definitely let me know, because it does sort of, it gets added to our list of things to keep briefing people on and say, hey, don't forget this, and you should be here, or why don't we invite them to this other thing? So that's
great.
Master matchmaker kind of activity.
Sure. Elizabeth, I jumped in. You had a second question.
That's okay. Thanks, Nina, and thanks for that information, Stewart. And my second question is, it might be premature, you might not be able to answer this, but thinking about the fourth mandate for the task force, which is to work to remove obstacles in the recovery and to address future risks and vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking that I know some of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers members, those who are creating funds for yep. the intermediate and the long-term recovery efforts, will also be working on identifying those things. Yep. You know what I mean? So I'm just wondering if there's a mechanism that might be able to be put in place as the task force forms and begins its work, where lines of communication can be open between all of your colleagues in Washington and our funders here who are taking the lead in those long-term recovery, in that long-term recovery work. And I probably can't answer that now, but I'm just thinking that could be
I can answer the second part. I can answer the second part, because the second part of it, I mean, your more direct part of the question at the end there was, is there a way to create a mechanism? That is the kind of thing that I want to be able to do, and irregardless of what those activities are, or those things that are going to address the future risks and vulnerabilities. Regardless of what they are, what I hope we're doing is getting sort of somewhat seamless information into the task force through this partnership office, and that would be my primary role, to make sure that stuff flows in. So therefore, Sarah, who's also on the phone, who was on some of the other calls as well with some of you, she and others in the office have been keeping a list, kind of a growing database of all the different funds that have been created. We're getting to the point now where we want to kind of put a basement on them and say, above a certain amount, and then start to tier them for medium to long term. And as those funds are created that you're describing, we would want to know that they exist, what they're for, what the intentions are, how they would fit together with whatever federal funding is coming. And that's the idea of, I'm not joking when I say matchmaking. I mean, it really is partnership brokering and trying to align those funds. So it's too early to say necessarily how we best do that. And if you have suggestions, totally open to it. What we've been doing so far is calling people or having them call us and say, hey, did you realize that they have this other fund and so-and-so's already invested in it? That's the kind of thing that happened immediately following the storm. Now that things are starting to kind of, I hesitate to say become more clear, but now that they're kind of lining themselves out a little bit and we know the task force is going to get up and running, the initial small amount of funding came from Congress and will probably be signed by the president today for the $9.7 billion, and the rest over the next week or two, and we'll see how that shakes out. In the meantime, no matter what those amounts are, any of those funds that are being created for specific purposes that hit along the lines of what the task force is going to be concerned about is exactly the sweet spot that we're in. And it's fantastic that you asked the conversation, the question that we're having this conversation.
Stewart, this is Denise at the GFO in New Jersey, and I just want to extend to you that we have a very robust mitigation task force that has been operating together for the last couple of months, and it would be really great to have anybody that you think appropriately plugged into that group regarding the resilience and building back stronger issues.
Great. Yeah, if you would shoot me you have my email somewhere, I think, in the midst of all that stuff. And if you don't, I'm glad to have.
We'll send it out again.
Yeah, you can do that. You can send it out, no problem. And I'm glad to start to kind of make those connections, because the other thing that will happen is that, and this happened immediately after the storm, as you can imagine, we were talking to foundations, and they would have specific instances of, say, a Section 8 building that was destroyed, and people don't know what to do. And so, to some extent, it sort of morphs from what is like philanthropic partnership creation to actual the work of in that case, relief. But now, in terms of recovery, we would want to be able to funnel any of that stuff to the task force and to the agencies that are part of the task force, but also as we get information, push it out, which is why it's so great that the listserv was created and those kinds of things. But from the JSO side, it would be great. Get in touch, and I'll make sure that the people that need to be there are there.
Great. Other questions? *7 to unmute.
Stewart, if nobody else has substantive questions, I have a silly comment.
Can I just, Stewart, did you get through all of your, I got lost. I admit, I apologize.
No, that's okay. I've just gone through 1 and 2. I've got 3 and 4 to do, so.
We do. Can we hold off then on this silly?
Course.
I'm not sure. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay. The last 2 are one on kind of the other activities related to Sandy recovery, and I just wanted to mention a few things because these are ongoing themes that then overlap with the work that we're doing. And some of you on the phone will know that at a kind of community level, there are federal grants that are coupled with foundation grants that are doing work that is perfect for sort of being called up, so to speak, that nonprofit or that grantee, to do the work on the resiliency or do the work on sustainability measures or whatever it might be. And so we wanted to make sure we touched on things like, for instance, we have been working on a deep green retrofits project, a pilot called the Landmark project with NYCHA in New York.
What's NYCHA?
The New York Housing Authority, sorry.
Okay.
I'm used to using all the acronyms. So working with the Housing Authority there on retrofits, well, we had to cancel a second Philanthropic meeting because of the storm. And so that second Philanthropic meeting is going to take place in 2 weeks. I'll also be up there for that, so I'm going to try to be at the TFN meeting, the Funders Network meeting, because it's around at the same time. It seemed silly to everyone to have a retrofits conversation about public housing and not now consider what has happened and be smart about, again, rebuilding better. And so that kind of thing is where what we were already working on takes on a new framing. It's not necessarily changed all that much. We don't step back, but we have to reframe and think about who our partners are and also think about how we're framing that particular project and working with the Mayor's Fund and the city on that. Another good example is we've been working in the building and with other agencies about how to use pay for success or social impact bonds, which you may have heard a bit about as of late. Thinking about long-term recovery and financing, and this comes from sort of my world, of my old CDFI world, like what kinds of funds do you need for the very long term to do some of the recovery, to do some of the right kinds of mitigation work and community rebuilding. So could pay for success or the social impact bond model be used in this? That's just another kind of thing that on a day-to-day basis we are working on, and so in our briefings we've said, there may be a long-term use for this kind of tool as opposed to just thinking about it as a recovery issue, but combining the two. Another one I would mention, and I sort of did already, is the international lessons. We've been working on some disaster, and we've been working on a ton of sustainability issues. It's kind of the framework of our relationship with Germany, with Brazil, with the Netherlands, and with many others. And so therefore trying to make sure that these kinds of lessons that we can use and apply, but also get flow back out to our partners, become part of this conversation as well. So certainly things that we have seen that the Dutch have been doing that are applicable, and I know that folks, local folks in the New York, New Jersey area have been talking to their partners in the Netherlands as well. So trying to bring some of those kinds of things into what was already an established relationship. And one final example, and these aren't all of them, but these are just to give you an example. One of the funders calls we have been we're getting ready to do was around a small contractors, minority contractors initiative in partnership HUD and SBA, and that takes on a whole new light when you think about small business recovery, when you think about rebuilding and contractors for the rebuilding. So the kinds of things, and you will see in the notes, Shauna Scoffrey from CERDNA mentioned this very thing. These are the kinds of things that they're already in motion or should be, therefore applying them to the work that we do helps leverage and align the funds even further. So those were a few things that I just kind of wanted to mention, since the activities that we're doing that relate to the Sandy recovery might be the immediate things that come out of the recovery, but they also are things that maybe have been on your plate for a long, long time. Certainly there are lots of experts in New Jersey who are grantees of yours, may be grantees of ours, and in some combination grantees of others, so to speak, and all of that is a base of knowledge and experience that can be brought to the fore. So I just wanted to touch on a few things. There are many others because you can think of all the other programs at HUD, and there's probably some applicability to the work that gets done to do the long-term recovery. And I'll just segue right into the other the final topic around the overview from the December 10th meeting, because I think they really kind of couple together, because what we decided and what we put forward to the Secretary and the leadership here was to start doing these convenings. And the first one was a philanthropic and private sector lessons from recovery. And the idea would be that we would then move and do something in New Jersey and be more concrete about it and be more explicit about creating the partnerships and the alignments, and do the same thing in New York somewhere. But the idea was to, in almost a TED Talk way, have the speakers that we had time for, because you couldn't do it even in the 2 or 3 hours, you couldn't get everything you wanted in there, but have the speakers that we lined up talk about their past experience or their foundation's past experience or corporation's past experience. And we did it around 5 themes. And those themes were defining recovery, timing issues, tools and systems, partnerships, and government integration. We left some things out purposely. One of the big things that kept coming up, and it certainly is a comfortable space for me, was sort of all of the kind of NGO interaction and all the grantees that are on the ground, like I just mentioned. Excuse me. That in and of itself was like an entire conversation, and is one in a sense that you all are having to really think about, because you hear from your grantees and you hear from people on the ground, and there are people that are active in the actual rebuilding plans on a day-to-day basis right now as we're talking about them. So go ahead.
I'm realizing the time, and I want to. Am I right in that there's a recording or that there was a PowerPoint from that is available for people?
Yes, I was just going to say,
Great.
I will not go into any detail, because what it was were comments based on those 5 sections. There's a summary, kind of a whiteout that has a wordle at the end, so you can see kind of how the meeting wordle shaped up in terms of the most frequently used words. There's a section on each of the speakers' comments based on the prompts I gave them, as well as a final question about the things that we can do together. So listen to it. If you haven't received it from us, we'll send it to you, and also just look at the kind of white paper, readout paper.
That's great, and I think we did. I think we sent something on it, and I'll ask, but we'll go back and check and work with you to make sure that we can get that out to people on that end. So, there's an enormous amount of information, and I want to thank Emily also for being on the call. I think it was Emily who had come in earlier too and let us know who's here in New Jersey. And if there were a couple of key things that the funders can do to help their grantees at this point, if it's information that you need or something along those lines, it'd be really helpful to get your perspective on that, because that's kind of what are some immediate things. I mean, I think our folks are, in the process of determining how they're going to respond, what they're going to do. They're in touch with folks, but we want to make sure that we're, there's sort of so many tracks going at the same time.
Yeah.
So are there some specific things that they could or should be doing? Is there information that they might have that should be getting to some key people? And who are those people, and how can we help get that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it kind of, as you say, there are so many movements occurring at the same time, and to some extent they have to occur. They have to happen now, because people are in harm's way and are still in a bad way in many locations. And thank goodness that we haven't had any more severe storms than we've had already with the snow and some of the cold. So, and then if you think about, in 3 to 4 to 5 months, where things need to be as the weather warms and people expect to be able to kind of have their lives back together in just some small form. So I think for the foundations that are on the phone, getting the most accurate information to FEMA as they do their surveys, because they're not even done. I know for a fact that last week or maybe at the beginning of this week, they were still out on Long Island, for instance, going place by place, doing more of their assessments and surveys. The more accurate all of that information is, because then when I, for instance, ask for a specialized map or chart, that information kind of flows from FEMA to somebody at HUD in our policy development and research area who's crunching numbers and doing the data maps, who then gives it to me, and I'm able to say, well, see, here's where you are, and this is what the situation is. The ironic thing about that is that they're there on the ground and know the situation better. So the easiest way if something comes up is, and if you don't know where to go and you don't have that direct FEMA or support contact, and there's just a question, is you can certainly reach out to me or one of the task force members. Once it gets up and running, there will probably be a public outreach or an engagement side of that task force or a staff person that doesn't exist yet. The good thing is that the people who are being detailed are coming from EPA, SBA, DOT, budget offices, etc. So there will be this kind of core set of experience that realizes that it's not going to come from kind of top down, it's going to come from bottom up. So, and also I think if there are things that need funding and need funding immediately, even though we'd all like to really align things as best as possible, you've got to do those things. So I feel like I've heard a couple stories where, people are holding back because they're not sure and they're waiting for the federal money. Well, if it's long term, then I think that's okay. If it's short term and it's kind of immediate needs, we've seen the delays that have occurred, and they're hurting me as well in a very small way, because I'm trying to make sure that we're all trying to make sure that the funding is aligned with the timing. So that's difficult to know.
So I think we're going to send out to folks. We had sent before the holidays. We had sent out a survey to all of you for our friends at FEMA. Denise Gilliam and I had worked on a survey. It's not just for FEMA, though, it's for the state, actually, in terms of understanding where the greatest needs are for the communities that have the least amount of capacity. And, Denise, you'll correct me if it's too late to keep trying to get people to complete this survey.
No, we absolutely would welcome survey responses, any and all.
Great. Okay. So we'll send that out again on the listserv. It's very easy. It's really important information for you to help them in understanding how your grantees are doing and organizations that are affected by this. So I think it's only about 5 or 6 questions. So we'll go ahead and get that out.
That's really helpful. And, the other thing, too, is that we've heard plenty of stories of where that low capacity exists. Is it possible that where there's high-capacity grantees in other parts of New Jersey, for instance, that funders already know about, and we've had a couple of conversations with various foundations about this, could that particular, and you've actually sent out a notice about when you sent out my first notice, the response on New Jersey Future triggered an email from me to 2 sets of funders who'd already funded that organization previously. And so is there a way to make sure that where there isn't capacity, you find some place to sort of transfer it over, or you find some place that can go to bigger scale and do more of that kind of work? So I think the foundations play an amazing role, because even that kind of money isn't necessarily going to transfer in from the federal government quickly and easily. It's going to take a little bit of time, even after they've done even after it's approved.
Okay.
And I'm crossing fingers that that's early next week. But
yeah.
I don't have much control over there. So.
I want to give a minute. I want to thank you, Stewart, so much for taking the time. I want to thank Emily, your colleague, and of course Denise for joining us. I want to open it up if anybody has any questions or comments or ideas. You can unmute your phone at *7.
Nina and Stewart, this is Mimi Box with the John Bon Jovi Soul Foundation.
Hi, Mimi.
Hi, Mimi.
Nina, thank you, Stewart, for being with us. And this is just, I see a lot of like a tug of war, a lot of pull from coming from different aspects. You have the residents that want to get things resolved quickly. You have the desire to be resilient and build back stronger. You want to be sure that if they do that it's fair and focused. Who ultimately holds their responsibility to ensure that all of these conflicting at times desires come together and are met?
So this is more Stewart talking than representing an organization of 10,000 plus all the other agencies. But what we can tell so far, and what I would say there is, and especially because we've talked with you previously, Mimi, on a couple of occasions, is that it is going to be a balance of the organizations that help the residents and their input on it in order to do these things right, and the balance is extra difficult when people need to or want to get back in their homes, and at that point may not be as open to we need to rebuild this with a better this, or we need to put a wrap on it first, or we need to do something else to the house that's going to take more time. Those are difficult conversations that will happen on the local level. What I'm hoping is that at the federal level and in the regional federal offices and the coordination between all of these parties and with you, that we'll be able to kind of hold to a certain point when those decisions are made, and then the funding can flow in. Because I think you may be having specific ideas about where you want to fund, and some of those places there are probably immediate needs. If they're built better, then that has to come from the local level.
Right. Okay.
And that's tough. It's such a hard balance because, if we had a magic wand, we wouldn't want anybody to rebuild back unless it was done in a much more inclusive, affordable, risk-mitigated, sustainable, et cetera, use all the adjectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before it got done.
Yeah.
So there's the balance, and having those plans. And that's just kind of individual home ownership. Then you kind of move to like multifamily places, public housing. You move to the big infrastructure, berms and ceiling doors and bridges and
That takes you then to the capacity level of some of these communities.
That's right.
So, okay.
That's right. And that's why I was saying that I think that there are probably some good grantees of yours out there who may be struggling right now, but given additional support both from a financial standpoint, but also kind of from a network and structural standpoint, could help other communities even though they're not in them right now because they bring the expertise to sort of plan properly. And there are those individual communities that will just plan a lot differently than the next one. I mean, probably all of you know that as well as I do, that you go from community to community and the story's just going to be different.
And this is Denise from FEMA. One of the ideas that we're talking about is the ability to actually help homeowners and small businesses make those decisions. And that's part of the reason that there was such a rush to get the new flood maps out. It's really all about letting individuals make good decisions. And we also know that, 2 years down the road, when the flood insurance is sky high because people did not build to the new flood standards, that they're really going to have problems. But one of the ideas we have is to really pull the right people together to actually be able to give very good advice to those homeowners that have not yet started the rebuilding process.
And Denise, that's one of the things that we have suggested in some of our briefing memos that we've heard from some of you is to create boot camps for residents, for mayors, for whoever it might be, that are sort of the recovery version of like NEA's Mayor's Institute, but also kind of on the residential level for the contractor level. Again, all of this needs planning and funding, and how it gets done is another question. But then you can think even long term. So one of the things we've been talking about with some of the funders and impact investors is can we create some kind of resiliency fund that's there at the ready to prepare people and plan people? And even further, is there a recovery fund of some kind that people draw down on and you can use PRIs to invest in, and it's there for the long term? So to Mimi's question, especially because you and the foundation may be looking specifically where to go, I think getting those plans and those people educated to make the decisions on the plans is a huge first step.
And this is Denise again. We actually have some information on an event that's being held this Thursday in Neptune along those lines, so we'll get that to you, Nina, to post on the listserv.
Great, or you can just send it out.
Okay.
Great. Terrific. Any other questions, comments, news that people want to share? I've gotten some information from Ann Fowler from the Funders Network for Smart Growth, and I'll see about how open that is for folks who might want to participate. So we will, this call has been recorded, and we will have it available with the recordings of all the other calls that we've had on our website that people can listen in. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we are planning a tour site visit for February 26th, working with Kathy Durante at Ocean First Foundation to be able to provide funders with the opportunity to sit down and talk with some of the key nonprofits, community leaders, and others to understand what's going on, what they need, how they're doing, what they're working on, all of those kinds of things. So a site visit for you, and stay tuned for more information on that.
And Nina, is that funders only? Sorry.
It will be funders only.
Okay.
Yeah. And Elizabeth, I'm wondering if there's any our next week's call. We are working to have some of the chairs of the long-term recovery committees to be able to provide some really local analysis for people, both in Bergen, Ocean, Monmouth, Middlesex, hopefully Hudson as well. So please continue to use the listserv. Reach out to us. Stewart, thank you very, very much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nina.
Denise, thank you again for participating, and we're going to hear from you, I think, later in the month. You'll have some more FEMA planning information for us. And I hope everyone stay well and stay warm. Thank you all. Happy New Year.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.